All right, we are back after a series of trials and travails, and hopefully I'm not as pixelated and you can hear my audio better, because that was one of the issues also that cropped up during the first incarnation of the show. So I am going to look at what's going on in chat to see how I'm sounding, so I get some feedback from you guys. Hopefully it's not sonic feedback. Let me just go here and go into the chat. Okay, how's my audio? Is it any better now? And how's the pixelation? I rebooted the computer.
Looks good to me.
Right? So yeah, I'm just asking people who are actually watching us live. Oh. You know, we're streaming this live. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can't screw up. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Let's see. We good? Is it better now? Pretty clear. Good. Do I look like a 14K modem? Audio is mostly good. Yes, Logan. All right, mostly good is better than crappy. So why don't we settle in here? Let's say hi to our guest. And our guest tonight is Cheri Potter. Hi, Cheri.
Hi, Robert. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I can. So I was trying to them the story about you meeting our friend Jay at the garage sale.
Yeah, I love her.
Yeah, and that's in Tucson, right? The Tucson area.
Yep.
Right. This was one of those interesting confluences that the universe often provides for us when we're paying attention and we're on the right path, and these things just happen sort of spontaneously. So are you a garage sale person? Do you like?
I am not. Sales? I never go to garage sales ever. We do charity events at the church, and that day was a book sale set up at the church that we were having the following day. So we do take in donation from people's rummage sales after they finish to the church, and then the church has a rummage sale of their own. And so we always stop in during their rummage sales when they're donating everything to us to introduce ourselves. And usually my mother goes to those things. And this time, since I was setting up at the book sale, I went with her and we went together. And and Jay happened to be there, so we met her.
So okay, okay, who broke the ice? Hi,
Jay
how are you?
Jay. Right. So she started talking to my mother.
How quickly did it take to get to astrology?
Actually, it was like a whole nother subject. So she was coming over and bringing a friend to look at some stuff here. And after she was here, she actually texted and asked to come back the next day. And she she called me because someone that she brought here wanted to say thank you, and their text message wouldn't go through. So she called me to say, do I have a black on my phone or something? I said no. And then I said, my phone doesn't usually pick up long distance phone numbers. So I asked if they had one. And so she said, just questioning why. I said, because I write books and a lot of people call all day long. And so it just blocks anything long distance that isn't recorded in my phone. So then she says, oh, I do astrology too. And so then I thought she had already knew about my books, because on the covers of them is like astrology charts.
Right.
And, but she didn't. She just happened to say like she does astrology. So,
right.
I don't know. We just hit it off. And the next thing, we're going to I'm celebrating her birthday with her at a restaurant. We had a best time. It was like a 5-hour lunch. I don't know. We just really hit it off, and we've just been really great friends ever since.
So was this the garage sale she got the crystal at?
I'm not sure what she bought. We left really quick,
Yeah, she was bragging to me that she bought this like enormous crystal.
That was just recently. Yes. Yeah. She did tell me about that.
Yeah. Quite a score.
Yeah. She's a good shopper. She's a really good shopper. She has great taste.
Apparently she picked you up, and you're going to be great. You're going to be great value tonight. Hold that book up again. Let's see that book.
Okay. This is the newest one. It's called Keepers of the Charge.
right?
Oh, the light's kind of glaring, but it has like the astrology chart in it.
Right.
So I don't know if you want me to jump into kind of what I do, or how you want to start.
Well, okay. So is the what you do part connected to what we're going to talk about, or is that something completely different?
No, it's connected. I was an
Connected.
eschatologist
Okay.
for 10 years, and that's how it kind of started.
Okay. And cue people in into what an eschatologist is.
Okay, so I translate ancient texts, which informs us of end time events. And there's a fairly famous pastor, Arnold Murray. I'll show you a little picture of him.
Okay.
Shepherd's Chapel, everyone knows who he is. Well, he's passed away since, but he always used to state you cannot put the book of Revelations in chronological order. And I love a challenge and I love a code. And so I did. I put it in chronological order in 2 books. This one shows you the chronological order and how it unfolds in 3 prophecies and the order of events. Then the other one explains the process of the translation of the codes. And so after I did that, all of a sudden, I tried to copyright. They never sent me my copyrights, but the books were out, and all of a sudden Cambridge makes me Miss Who's Who in 2008, 2009. I don't know if you can kind of see that.
Wow.
And then the government somebody shows up. I don't know if it was the government or some other agency. And they start putting wiretaps in my house, all over my house, which I wasn't supposed to photograph, which I did. Anyways.
Now, when you and I were talking on the phone, you thought that you were a Nielsen family. Is that
Right.
what they
So
told
they showed up.
Yeah.
Right. And they said they were Nielsen. And so they just wanted to record because I had children and they wanted to see what we were watching. And I said, oh, that'll be fun. We could put some input in, maybe get some more wholesome channels. So I agreed. And then all these trucks showed up for a week with a whole bunch of men in suits, wow. Not even in jeans, in suits. And they, right. And I was so naive. And I put all of this, I mean, every house, every room, if there was like little heartbeats, and it would show you like how many people were in the room, and it would pick up your heartbeat and it would record every movement, like everything. And so
yeah, it's a little beyond Nielsen.
So then my girlfriend goes, what is all this? And I said, it's Nielsen. And she goes, it can't be, because one house in 50,000 people get the Nielsen recording, and it comes in a little box that you plug into the back of your TV. She goes, I am that person. So she was a Nielsen person. So then I'm like, well, what is this? So I started taking some of the equipment off of it and wearing it as jewelry while I walked around to see if it would record stuff. Then our house was hit by lightning. And when the phone company came, because it knocked out our phone in the back of our house, he pulled this out and he says, do you want me to reinstall this because your phone lines are hooked up? And I said, well, what is it? And he said, it's an international receptor. It picks up international like information. And I said, well, does every house have that? And they said, no. So I'm like, oh, can I keep it? And they let me keep it. So that was weird. So it got really fun after I started working with Revelations.
Interesting.
And yeah, that was the start. That was just the start. So right away I'm thinking, oh, my books are going to be famous and they're going to go all over. But then really it kind of slowed down a little bit. And then I think it was because I was going to get a divorce. And the day I called the lawyer to get a divorce, Nielsen called me right after and said, we're coming to get our equipment. And we had a 2-year contract and it was only like a year and a half. So I said, well, you still have another 6 months, but they came and got it. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. I'm moving out and they're coming to get their equipment. So I moved to Arizona. And when I got here, I started doing the charity events at the church, and my dad comes toddling at a charity event with a box of graph paper. And he looked really crazy. And I'm like, what's going on? And he says, I found you this paper to write your next book on. So I'm like, okay. And I look and it's all graph paper. And I'm like, I can't write a book on graph paper. So I get back to another city where I was living and at the time with the graph paper. And I didn't want to let my dad down. And then I remembered that there were codes in the Bible. And the codes, I sent you some links, some pictures.
Mhm.
And so I'm going to hold it kind of up. I don't know,
Right.
can you see?
I can see it.
Okay, so here you have Hebrew letters
Right.
all the way down. And normally that's not in your average Bible, but I use the
Right.
companion Bible because Behringer and Dr. Ginsburg spent their life composing the original Bible back together with the Masorah and the Minor Masorah. So you get all this information, and every jot and tittle they put back in that was originally there. So when you're in Exodus, you'll see a line around 18.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, hey, none of the other numbers have that. And you start going, why is that there? All the way to Revelations, you see like a period in verse 21, 27. And you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't belong there. It's next to the number. And so the Sopherim were the gatekeepers to the scriptures. And they kept every letter and jot in place for a reason, to secure all their sacred information. When I put the large code together, besides the gematria, which is all the letters,
Right.
it actually translated to ancient Hebrew that said Yahweh Shidakanu, which meant the right to passage, God's right to passage. So then I knew it did something. So it gave you like the right to passage, but what? And then
right. So it was like it was like kind of an Indiana Jones thing. It was like, here you go, you have the right to keep going, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Da Vinci Code. We're in Da Vinci Code territory here.
Right. Oh, I was so upset about the Da Vinci. What a failure on that. I was very I love codes, and that really disappointed me how they put that together. But so then
hold on a quick sec. So we're in your other life outside of being an eschatologist, were you a decoder? Was that what you like?
No, I just did that for fun.
Yeah.
I just did it for fun. I did become, well, being in Arizona, I did transfer my career into be a federal officer for a few years. Not using my codes, just as a job, so I can continue to fund my code breaking.
Right. Okay, cool. All right.
But then I got to
when did you figure out you had an ability to see things and hook them up and put them together? When did that become clear to you?
I don't know. I always just did it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm socially awkward, but I can look at something and I could say, oh, do you see that, or that code, or, do you see the number in the picture? Or like, I was always good at that.
Yeah.
So when I saw the codes, I just saw them. I just automatically knew, like, oh, there's something. And then they were really quick. So in Psalms, there was over 200 codes, which in the book of Josephus, who was the father of a historian, and he actually writes that he used to get the gold from the Pharaoh of Egypt by trading codes. And if the Pharaoh guessed the riddle, he would give the Pharaoh gold. And if he couldn't guess the riddle, he would have to give Solomon the gold. By the end of all the codes, there was 200 codes unsolved, which they say they put into the scriptures. And so in Psalms, there was 200 codes in the gematria, where it was Hebrew letters, where you translate them to numbers, and then they would make a mathematical apparatus. So when you hear the Ark of the Covenant, the traditions of man says it's a gold box with 2 angels on the top and a mercy seat for God. And the high priest would speak to God on the mercy seat. But technically that can't be, because the fourth commandment says thou shalt have no graven images of anything in heaven, in under the water, or under the earth, meaning the angels in heaven, the fallen angels under the earth, any demonic forms under the ocean where they say Satan's seat is. So there couldn't be angels on it, because there's also a verse that says God is not the author of confusion, meaning he doesn't change. He's never changing. So when he says you can't produce images of angels, he's serious. He wouldn't give a pattern to his chosen people to make an image of angels. So it wasn't, the terminology angel was a miscommunication or of translation in the Bible. And the ark was actually an arced mathematical measurement. When the codes were translated, made mathematical formulas of like apocalyptic and astrology charts of the sun and the lunar systems, which was amazing. Right. I think I told you how the sundial came about, and there was 8 dials in the 200 codes that came about with all these systems. 8 dials that came out of it, it just in Psalms. And the sundial came out just by using the actual chapters from 120 to 134. They were all titled the Song of Degree. So when you folded them and added them together, they all came to 254. The middle one didn't fit because there was an extra one. So you take out the middle one, which is 127. You add those numbers together, and 127 gave you 10 for 10 degrees of the sun, and the 254 gave you 11, which was one shadowed by itself. And then you had each segment for each side of the sundial, and the half of the 120 is half of 254, which made the stylus on the top. So then you knew you had a sundial. And I did all 200 codes in about 2 weeks. It was like really fun. And then when I finished, it actually produced some powers, and I was like, wow.
What did it produce? What kind of powers?
Like some teleportation stuff went on. So then I put out these 2 books of talk. They're all called the talk projects, which is tables, meaning mathematical formula tables of the covenant. The covenant is a perpetual law of physics. So when you say the Ark of the Covenant, it was an arced mathematical dial of the covenant, which were perpetual laws of the creation laws put into scriptures that gave all the elect the powers from the Holy of Holies to transform on earth for the preservation of the human race. So you see Moses, and he's wearing a breastplate of 12. And those are supposed to represent each of the 12 tribes of Israel, but they also represent the months of the year and then the zodiac. And so it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Then you see Solomon with the molten sea. So when Solomon becomes king, it was David that translated the codes from the power of the Holy Spirit and gave the patterns to Solomon. And he tore up the garments of Moses. And so the actual garments was not the empowerment used with the Ark of the Covenant, because it was mathematical formulas. You actually see Moses goes up and down 6 times to the mount. He doesn't just go once. He goes once and gets 2 commandments, comes down, he breaks them because they're all worshiping the golden calf. He goes back up. He gets 2 more, which are the 10 commandments. Then he goes up 4 more times. The 3 times he goes up, he comes down with 2 tablets in his hand, which make the patterns on the dials on each tablet make the 6 sides of the box of the ark. So there probably was a box, and it was probably wooden, because the translating of the tablets actually was a type of stone. I think it was Schmitten stone, which was actually a wood.
I think it was just, yeah.
It was wood. It wasn't actually stone. They were wooden tablets. And so that actually made the box that they put together. And then the last time he goes up, he's given a pattern. And then God says, now make it according to the pattern of which I've shown you in the mount. So then he comes down and he puts the whole ark together. And when he has the 2 rods of Aaron in the mathematical script, you see the wind gates kind of crisscross over through it, which is the 2 rods that go through the ark. And those are the wind gates. And you have north, south, east, and west.
Right.
So you see, so there's all this stuff like the molten sea of Solomon. If you think of the zodiac and Solomon's molten sea, it was a piece of glass that had water on it. The water reflected the stars. So all he had to do was look out of his window and he could see the zodiacs in this molten sea that was in his courtyard. He called it molten because it was the empowerment of change through the 4 zodiac that actually molted something. So you have the water bearer, he loses his water. You have
the Scorpio, the serpent, right?
The scorpion loses his tail, the crab loses its shell, which is actually the eagle.
Right.
And then you have the Taurus, which loses his horns, which it should be Leo, because that would have made the perfect 4 corners.
Well, the crab should be Leo. The crab, because they have the horn, and then the lion would be the 4 fixed signs, right? So could the lion lose something like his courage, maybe? I don't know.
No. So the thing with the Leo is Taurus comes right. Taurus is a wind gate. Do I have them? Okay. So let me explain it to you this way. The winds in the Keepers of the Charge, the last book I just did, when you are in the seals of Revelation, it talks about 4 horses. And then through the Bible, it says these horses are riding to and fro the earth all the time. So those are the winds. Those aren't actual horses. They're not spirits. They're the 4 winds of the earth, north, south, east, and west. And he says that before creation, he set the circuits of the earth, which are the winds. And those are the bounds or the boundaries which conceal everything in the cosmos. It's like holding it up. It's holding everything in place. It's moving things according to time. So the 4 horses, when you see the white horse, that is the east gate, because Christ's seat is at the east side. So when Revelation says you see Christ riding, I should have had more dials ready for you. When you see Christ riding, one out for you, you actually see him in white. He's riding a white horse when you see Christ again. And that's the east gate. I guess I could use this one. So
is that a horse, or does he come in on an ass, or is this a different?
No, it's actually they're riding the winds. So
Okay,
when he's talking in Zechariah, when they're talking about a vortex, he's talking about a flying scroll. It's a vortex. It's a round cylinder, is a scroll, and it's a flying scroll. So they're talking about vortexes that are coming down. And Leo is actually the east gate, which this is like the throne of Christ. So God's throne is on top. It's Ephraim, and he says Christ is sat at the right hand of God, which is actually east at a 90-degree angle. And that was a code in Proverbs. And it actually aligned them in Ezra and Nehemiah. It gave all the gates. So it starts after the codes are made. It actually starts from, where is it? I haven't done this in a while. So I'm kind of going back to the beginning. 1 Kings 19 and Isaiah 37 make up the same exact chapters, but there's one extra chapter verse in Isaiah 37, but they're word for word. So what changes in these 2 chapters that They could have word for word, the same count of words, but one has more of a verse. Well, the break changes in verse 15, and it cuts it in half and makes a 16th verse, which adds an extra verse. So you have a code of 1516, and this is what starts the understanding of the codes. When you take the magic square that make up 16 place settings of 15 degrees, which was an ancient Masonic symbol, and during Solomon's time, he said the Masons built the house of the Lord. And so the Masons carried their symbols, but apparently didn't carry the understanding to the knowledge of their Illuminati, their secret society. Because then you now have the place setting for the actual survey of the heavens. And when you outline the zodiac with the 4 winds, you actually, and with the element gates, which are the actual gates, like the horse gate is for the firmament. You start with Ephraim. Where am I? I'm a little, here's the way I like it. Okay, so Ephraim, so the outer gates, it makes 2 complete rings. I don't know if you can see these. A little bit more.
You know, I have some of those images you sent me. I could use those.
Okay. But it makes the place setting of these are the heavens gates, and these are the surveys of heaven. And they actually talk about these gates and align them in the scriptures, but you have to pay attention because the codes go all the way from Genesis 1 into Revelations 22. And so it gives you the names of all the codes and all of the each gate and what they do. So God's throne is like the north, and Christ is the Leo, and he's the tribe of Judah, and he's the white horse. So the east wind is actually the white horse that's going to carry Christ when he returns to the valley gate, which is actually earth. The west wind is a red horse, and the west is where the sun sets, and the red sunset by night, sailor's delight. So you got the west winds. The north wind is black. So when you look directly up at the night sky, it is black because of this, there's no light, except the shadow from the sun. And then the south wind is the pale horse, which they call grizzled, like spotted. And they call death because the season of death is winter, which is white, like and spotted from the snow. So each of the seals in Revelation is decoded by a horse. Right. It's not about a plague. It's about the zodiac. And then they say things like this horse rider had a bow. That's Sagittarius, the archer. He was wearing a crown. That's a Capricorn with the horns. He goeth forth. So that's the water bearer of Aquarius. Then the west wings for Leo, it says and then the second horse was a red horse, which is the west wing, and he goes out to kill, which is Leo the lion who goes hunting. One another, which is Gemini, the twins, with a sword, which is the claw of the crab. The north wind, which is black, is Libra, and he's carrying a pair of balances for the scales of Libra.
Scales, yeah, right.
And then the virgin is Virgo. She's carrying the wheat, which is the harvest for August and September. Scorpion is the season of October, November, which is the wine and the oil. The south wind horse is Aries, which is slain in the spirit, killed, which is March and April for Passover and Easter. And Pisces for hunger, which is the fish that feeds the multitudes. So when you read the symbolism, what each horse rider is carrying, each wind is carrying 3 zodiac on each of the systems. And so the seals of Revelation actually show us and is talking about the zodiacs. So the horse gate is the firmament. When God made creation, the creation law states that that the dominion of the firmament was given a sun and a moon and the stars to rule it. So who rules the dominion? The kings rule the dominion. So when Revelations is talking about, and the kings, they're talking about the zodiac, which are the kings of the sky. And it's not about these earthly kings that are like, oh, well, Putin's going to do this to this king, and we think this interprets Spain, and, you know, going into all this. He's actually talking about the zodiac and what to expect by the interpretation of the stars. Now, I never understood astrology, astronomy, any of that. So this was all new to me. So finding Jay was like finding a gold nugget, you know, because she just knows about all of it. And she says she learns from you and she loves you so much. And that you're so good. She's always like, he was right on today. She's always so excited about your show. She's so excited about things. I love her.
Yeah, she's great. Yeah, totally great.
So when you start seeing how everything kind of comes together, it starts making all these powers. And in the book, the last book, what I did, because this book actually just narrows down how the codes were produced and some of the effects of how, like, it exploded our house when activated. So there's like, you have to close the gates when you open the gates when you're working them. So Moses learned the secrets of the creation laws, which have to abide by everything created by God. So when he wielded the powers through the understanding that he was given by God through the arced mathematical measures of the covenant of creation laws of physics that are perpetual, he was able to do all these things like alchemy, and he teleported from the mountain to the Mount of God. He drew water from rock. He healed people. So these were all parts of each one of the powers. So it did teleportation. You see, Philip goes down in the water in Acts 37, and he's baptizing a eunuch. And when he comes up, he's not there anymore. He's now seen in another country preaching the word of God because he spontaneously moved through water activity. You see Peter moves through the prison through this gate of invisibility during Passover, during the Paschal moon, which is a full moon. And he walks through like an invisibility that nobody in town sees him. You see Nehemiah, he uses teleportation and he goes down, and he says, and no man saw him. And he goes down and he views Israel on fire, meaning the fire gates, because it goes in a system of 4 water gates, then 4 earth gates, and then 4 fire gates, and the 4 wind gates crisscross through the molten symbolism. And the 4 cherubim that are recorded in Revelation, you have the ox for Taurus, the eagle for scorpion, the Leo for lion, and the water bearer for man. Right. So those are the 4 winds that are the crisscross corners, because we know that there are 16 tribes of Israel because of the rotations from Genesis to Revelation. Sorry about your Reuben situation.
Well, we'll talk about that in a second. That's it. So what Cheri and I are referring to is, I found out that there was a tribe called Reuben, and Reuben. Let me see if I can do a screen share. This, hold on. Reuben is associated with the sign of Virgo, and being a Virgo, at least here in this lifetime, barely. I'm looking around, I'm going, oh man, look at Leo's Judah and Pisces is Levi, right? I'm like, who is this Reuben character? And it's like, I don't know about this Reuben character. I'm kind of a little jealous of Judah over here and Levi over here. So tell the story about Reuben.
Okay, so Reuben Okay, so a man goes, an Israelite goes to the tribe of Reuben because Israel was segregated into the tribes and everyone got their piece of land. And that's where their bloodline lived and flourished. And so he visits the tribe of Reuben. During his stay, when he was supposed to be treated like a guest and breaking of the bread and the hostess, the Reubenites took his concubine and raped her and beat her and left her for dead on the doorstep. So when he came out in the morning to get her to leave, he saw she was dead and raped and all these horrible things that have happened to her from the Reubenites. And so he slices her up into tribals, into all tribes, and he sends a piece of her to each tribe of Israel. And so all the Israelites say this has never happened in Israel before, and it was an abomination. So they actually exterminated the tribe of Reuben for a period, but I think they left like so many alive to carry on the bloodline, but they pretty much took them out. And so there you have your Reuben sandwich.
Well, okay, right. Because it brought up to me this idea. Well, that's like a Reuben sandwich, right? You're taking the slice of the meat and piling them up. And it's like, well,
The breaking of bread.
And breaking the, so how did a Reuben sandwich ever become known as a Reuben sandwich? I think we just found out.
Right. Yeah. Just like Simple Simon, Jesus calls Simon simple, and then we start saying Simple Simon, and and doubting Thomas. One of the disciples doubted, and Jesus says, "Oh, Thomas, you doubt," and so we get doubting Thomas. And
right. Well, maybe your next book could be Sandwich Code.
Yeah. I love a sandwich.
Yeah. I'll never look at a Reuben the same though. So there are 16 tribes, which is interesting. And now I put up the graphic here, and the 16 tribes are in the center wheel. Is that correct?
No, well, let's see on this one. So you're getting the months on the outside. Yeah, the tribe. Yeah, they have them on the the third wheel in. They're showing the tribes of Israel. But if you actually put them together, they're really, it's just making reference to the zodiac, because it's giving you the months. And so when he's saying reckon the tribes, he's actually not talking about people, but he's trying to symbol you to go and use the zodiac through the breastplate. And this is interesting. So since you have it up, if you look at Leo and then you look at Virgo next to it, so the Sphinx. Now, Solomon married the Pharaoh's daughter, and there's a verse in Psalms, I think it's chapter 90, where Moses actually has one of the Psalms is his, and he actually talks about the Sphinx, but he talks about it kind of in code, and he says that it's a cat ready to jump. And so if you look at Virgo, it actually starts time in the original dial, because it also gives you the whole apocalyptic chart of time. And on this one, on the south. So on this one, you're actually getting, on one of the first ones, you actually get the time clock of when time starts and when it stops. And it started in Virgo, which is the head of a virgin, like on the Sphinx, because they said that the chin piece that broke off actually declares her a woman and not a male pharaoh.
Right.
And then so she starts Virgo, and that's when time actually started, and then it ends for the tail end of Leo, the body of a lion with the tail end. And so we're given like 6,000 years in a system that started in Virgo and ends in Leo. And if you look, when Christ was born, it actually points directly north for the North Star, in which you were talking about some really interesting information about the North Star.
We're talking about Regulus and the pole star and Jupiter, both in the sign of Leo on 9/11, which is like either 30 AD or 34 AD. And it's the only, that day, 9/11 in that year is the only day where those two come together like that. And so that is an indicator that that would be the birth of Christ, would be that day.
Right.
And that because number one, both of the luminaries sign of the king, right? So it'd be like the king of kings with
Right.
Regulus and Jupiter. Also, the luminescence of Jupiter with Regulus would make a big deal in the sky, right? So if three quote unquote that were looking for where being was born, right? If the Magi are actually physical people, that they would look at, that would be the indicator of that celestial event. And so it's a very interesting day. And of course, the symbolism of being born of a virgin is connected to the month of Virgo. And there are many scholars who will chime in on this and agree with that.
Well, in the companion Bible, it's actually recorded by Ginsburg and Berenger, after collecting all the authentic documentation of all the ancient scriptures, that Jesus was born September, and they calculated 14, but it's very possible they're just a few days off, or being the time difference, Israel's like the day before us, September 11.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. So, and I've seen some other days. I've seen that September 14th day, but it's that one conjunction of Jupiter and Regulus on it, which is a key, I think, to the chart for that, for the birth chart, actually. One of the other things you were talking about, which was, I think, kind of interesting and sort of like triggered something, was Jesus and his time in
Tibet. Do I have a treat
right?
for you? I have it with me.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so this is the actual holy face coin, right? Let's see, where am I? Okay, right there is the actual, I don't know how bad that's showing, but so I ordered the one from, and this is a Tibetan boat. So I bought this, and this coin was actually sealed in resin in this boat, and I bought it in an antique store in another state. And it sat there for years, and I was puzzled. Like, it just always called to me. So I took it to the Chicago 5th and Wabash to a Tibetan archaeologist, and she took the resin and she did one of those genetic testings on it, and atomic testings or something. I forgot how they test them.
Yeah,
and
it's a carbon dating thing.
Carbon dating, thank you. I can never get that one right. And she said it was about 2,000 years old resin. And I was like, that's amazing. So that would prove that the coin itself was 2,000 years old. So then I got a hold of Adrian Wills from willbridge.com, who sells the castles to the rich and famous. And he was investigating because he was really intrigued by the story. And we found that there was this place called the Holy Face Nuns that advertised the same coin. The difference is my coin has a numerics on the back of actual dollar amount or a financial amount. Where did my phone go? Okay, I did. Oh, and I took pictures so you could see it better by me blowing it up on my phone. And so mine actually, was there too much light on this?
A little bit of glare, but I can see like a sun radiating.
Yeah, but then there's like the number of like 10, like
yeah.
And then on the one that the Vatican shows just says Amoninus Dubino, and it says something different. And so it's not the same. It doesn't have the same numeric value. And so theirs is like a replica. And we investigated the story that they told about the nun. And apparently the nun had died like 50 or 60 years prior to when they said that the Holy Face was created and inspired by the nun for the Italian troops before World War II to keep them protected. Because the story goes, this nun had a dream that she needed to make these medallions for the Italian soldiers to protect them during World War II. She went to the Pope. They named the Pope. Apparently, according to the records, he wasn't Pope for another like 60 years himself, because he was actually in the Nazi regime at the time. So their story wasn't adding up according to the records in the archives. So Adrian gets a hold of them, and he is European, so he did rather well with the translation and interpretations. And they actually sent us a letter saying we need to stop investigating this for our own good. And
wow.
And so we kind of did for a while because we didn't know what to do. I'm always in trouble. I like codes and mysteries, but I'm always in trouble.
Right.
So that was really interesting. So I feel that this piece alone just proves that the Tibetans were like Jesus was in Tibet during his missing years from 13 to 29. And also, if you look at the Vatican records, it was after World War II that they were short 100 bishops, and 47 bishops that came in for the first time were not Italian, but they were Tibetans. And so that's how you see like Benny Hinn, actually he's from India, and he's in the Vatican. And you're like, how is that possible when you're not Italian? Because the Vatican was always all Italian. But after the war, when they came up with this whole holy face coin to duplicate the one coin, supposedly they have one coin like this, one in their archives, and I have one. And so they actually at that point let in the Tibetans in an agreement that they wouldn't conceal or they wouldn't disclose the fact that Jesus was in Tibet during the missing years, because they have the Tibetans had all this mystic that they recorded everything that Christ taught them, the same powers as this of the Ark of the Covenant that was performed in the Holy of Holies by the high priest.
So Christ was the teacher Christ was the teacher in Tibet, not vice versa.
Right. So you said earlier, go ahead, about the
so when you brought up Benny Hinn, who is Indian, right? And the system in India is called the Vedic system. And it never occurred until you brought it up that there is a very peculiar relationship between the name Vatican and Vedic kin.
Right.
Right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that was like, when you said that, I'm like, wow. Okay. Well, you didn't say the Vatican part, but you kind of clued me in with the Tibetan thing. And then you were talking about the Vatican. I'm like, okay, hold on a second. Vedic and Vatican. So they're telling you something right there.
Yeah, they're disclosing a mystery, but that's what the secret societies like to do. They like to put it in your face, so you're so familiar with it that you don't connect the dots. That's just how they do it.
Right.
So I feel really like awesome about having this. Like, it's evidence to me, that Christ was there. And there's a Bible verse that when the disciple goes to Christ and he says, Master, should we pay taxes to Caesar? And he goes, well, whose face is on the coin? And he says, Caesar's. And he goes, well, then render to Caesar's what's Caesar's. But if the coin would have had the face of Christ on it, like the holy face original coin that was struck in the image of Christ at the time, because it was tradition to strike a coin in the image of someone that they reverenced, like, any of the leaders and pharaohs and kings, everyone had a coin struck in their image. So if Christ would have been in Tibet as the Son of God, because the actual coin says that he is the governor of the world with the face of Christ, which meant that the Tibetans did reverence him. And so then if the coin would have actually had Christ's face on it, Christ would have said, no, that's our coin because it's struck in my image. But it had Caesar, so he passes it on. And I think that verse was actually thrown in. So when this time came and you couldn't find the truth, that the truth, like parts of truth, would start to be revealed.
Right, right. Very interesting stuff. Okay, so there are people who believe in like a different, like kind of astro-theological model, and that Jesus never existed, that he's actually Apollo or Ra, or he's the rising of Helios and the sun, right? And they'll tell you, what this is really the story. It has nothing to do with the Bible and a historical figure. I'm not necessarily the person that believes in that, by the way, but there is a large group of people who do ascribe to that cosmology. What are your thoughts on that? And what would you say to those people?
Well, the Bible does have a lot of analogy.
Right.
The difference between the analogies in the scriptures is, first of all, the Bible is called the living word for a lot of reasons. You can open it up, it's a story, it's a learning process, it teaches you morals, it teaches you how to be spiritual, it explains to you how to pray, like all these good things. But then in the Song of Solomon, it's called The Secret of the Stairs. And there's actually a book by Walter Rasp, who was the archaeology for the Dead Sea Scrolls. And he wrote about The Secret of the Stairs. There's a book out there. And it explains how the deeper into it you get, the more secrets and revelation you get. And that's probably how I ended up getting all the secrets of the high priest from the Holy of Holies, like ancient technology that was passed through the elite of the high priest, who in Israel, they govern with religion. So Moses, Solomon, and Christ. And then it says that in the end times, the Holy Spirit will pour out his spirit and we'll start receiving all the truth. And so now the ancient knowledge has come back, because I believe these are the end times, the way the world's going and all the signs and the, everything that's happening. But even though it has analogy in there, the analogy is given so that we could see the clues and take them further. And that's why there's so many interpretations. And there's even a verse that says the Bible is subject to interpretation, because as a person is on a certain level, they will understand it different than another person on a different level or with different needs. It's called the Living Bible. It's the only actual book in heavy circulation from thousands and thousands of years ago. I mean, now we're finding the cuneiform and the Tel El Armani from Egypt and different tablets, but to have been given to us all of these years, every day at our bedside, in the bookshelf, in the churches and hotels, everywhere. It's something that's amazing that has survived. And it's also amazing, and I think it's a little bit of evidence that the world is trying to destroy it by translating it into modern terminologies.
Well, you also have the Scofield Bible, which is an abomination, if you ask me. Are you familiar with the Scofield Bible?
No.
No. Well, we'll save that.
Like, is that like under the King James?
Yeah. So Scofield Bible is an abridged Bible that has a bunch of talking points, and it was basically commissioned by this guy named Scofield. And he was pushing the doctrine of John Nelson Darby. And John Nelson Darby was the first person to come up with this idea of the rapture, which had never occurred before in any rendition of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So the Scofield version of the Bible was, it really changes the Bible in a very fundamental way. It's actually in very wide circulation, and they play a rapture story with it. And it's not, the rapture is not in the King James version. I mean, it's not there.
Well, if you read this,
if it's there, it's a different printing. Yeah.
There's a whole chapter in this one that talks about why the rapture theory is dangerous.
Yeah, it's very dangerous. It's disempowering.
It is, because then you're not prepared. Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely. It's just like, I'll just go to church and I'll do my thing. And I'll just wait for it all to happen. And
then when
help.
all the tribulation and trials come, because 2 Timothy says we are all subject to trials and tribulations, we are just not subject to wrath. And so when the trials and the tribulations come and you see an antichrist stand up in power and all this stuff happens, then everyone who's a believer is going to start losing their faith, and their salvation is pivoting on some false belief system because it didn't happen for them.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, that's what the Scofield Bible is about. It's mainly the inclusion of the rapture, which was not an ancient doctrine or a part of the original text. So, but this, what you're, okay. Can you use a swear word with you? Is that all right?
Yes.
All right. So if people do what you were talking about and studied it in a way, because no way that I think you could break it down the way that you're breaking it down, including a lot of the astrological understanding, the gates and the winds and all this stuff, right? There's no way that you could go into what you're going into and not come out changed in some ways.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a story.
Okay. All right.
So, and just so you know, before I go into that, I did break it down to every month and every moon cycle and every degree of the sun and everything. So if anybody wants to attempt all the powers, they can have it at their own fingertips without spending 20 years of research, because I think it was meant to be given to the people. So during Obama's time, he shut down a lot of private colleges and universities.
Right.
At which time I had twins in a private university. And I also tried to put in copyrights at that time for talk, which they would not give me my copyrights for, but I was entitled to use the university for 2 years for my own for talk project. And so that was awesome. I took it. I still wanted my copyrights, but I didn't have them. I was just afraid someone else was going to use my work. And after all my work, someone else in the government would get credit. But so while I had the university, I put together a talk group of all atheists. And so there was a man who I made the president over my project named Ron Bravo. And he had an atheist group online with over 20,000 followers called Tabula Rasa. And everyone was an atheist that was in the group, because I didn't want religious discrimination, Catholic versus Christian terminologies and all this stuff. I wanted to see if the powers worked that was given in the dials as they should. As we were doing it, everyone went under spiritual warfare. And I warned them about that, because you have to pass the realm, from this realm all the way to the top, in order to start receiving the powers flowing. It's kind of like unclogging your vortex or something. I wouldn't even know how to explain it. So spiritual warfare happens to Christians that are making progress and gaining ground for God all the time. And people are like, oh, you're cursed because this is happening to you. No, I'm stepping out for God. And so the enemy is trying to keep me from gaining ground and preventing me from moving. That's why this bad stuff's happening. If he already owned me, he wouldn't be attacking me. I'd be having blessings and having a comfortable life. So everyone went through their own spiritual warfare on the team. And so they said it was demonic. And the team broke up after the end of 2 years. And which brings us to another story. But anyways.
So did you destroy 20,000 atheists single-handedly? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So now Ron Bravo is a minister. So everyone broke up for the summer, said it was all demonic. Then we regathered back together after the summer, and everyone wanted to start it up again. And I said, no, I already spent 2 years. You're slowing me down, because I had more research to go through.
Oh, so they just broke for the summer. They didn't break because they were.
No, they broke because of spiritual warfare, but it just happened.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Like we kind of parted over the summer. And when we came back, because they just wanted to not be attacked by demons and weird stuff happening. And so
Right.
when they all came back, in the summer, Ron Bravo came to my house and he said, I need to talk to you. And he wanted to talk about what the stuff that had happened and why he wanted out. And so while we were talking, he goes, every time I see you, I see 611. And I said, okay. And then he's like, this is crazy. This is crazy. So finally I buy him a Bible, because before I was just going through the project without an actual scripture, just the technology. And I give him a Bible, but I don't open it. It's in a box and it's in wrap, like a plastic. And so he goes to his friend's house and he tells them about, before nobody was allowed to talk about the project. It was, secret, concealed. So he finally breaks open and tells his friends. And then they said, well, what kind of Bible did she give you? Like, was it demonic? And so he opens it up and the front cover says 1611 King James Bible. And so he's like, I wasn't seeing the one. So every time I see you, I see 611. So he was seeing this and he was blown away. So then he came back and he ended up staying for like 2 weeks at my house because he just couldn't leave. He's like, wait, I have more questions. We just fall asleep. We left him there. We just go to work and do our thing. And then he just is like, I know what I have to do. And he went and he became a minister, and every single person that was in the group is now involved in some kind of Christian, process of trying to not spread talk. They're still a little bit like, whoa, it's a little too much, but, spreading the word, saving people. A lot of people work at the mission for, drug addicts that have to go to church and all that stuff, and trying to reform people who are really down on their luck. But a lot of people, they all went into the field of religion, and it was awesome. Yeah, single-handedly, 20,000 atheists.
Wow. That's amazing.
So that's not me though. That's God, and that's the power of God. And so the problem is the church is conformed of governments, of religious governments that give you a doctrine.
Yeah.
So you go to this doctrine or this, depending on how you want to be governed. But the traditions of man is not in religion, because even Christ is like, you don't want to be judged like the Pharisees who go by the letter of the law. You want to, be in the spirit. And so I go to church and I do fundraisers and all that stuff, but I'm not a church goer every Sunday, but I do go to church because I learn more on my own. But it's great for beginners and different people. But so when you are under that, even when I talk to ministers, because I was a minister for 10 years as a volunteer, and I traveled the country, and I only worked with the actual ministers, priests, pastors who would tell like that we're under spiritual warfare. And they would tell me, well, the giants are in the Bible, but I'm not at liberty to talk about that to the congregation, even when they come to me with questions, because it's not in our doctrine. And so for the longest time, when I wrote my first 2 books, I was banned from churches because I talked about the fallen angels. I talked about the Nephilim and the giants, and that was forbidden. And so back then, it was voodoo. I was like the devil. Then they came back and they're like, please come to our church. We're sorry. We are now allowed to talk about this and that. But it's a doctrine. And so when that, and then people like in the Catholics are like, oh, I don't believe in religion. Why should I have to confess to a man or pray to a saint that's dead? And because that's all traditions of man. But when you just know the truth and you're out of all that, being herded like sheep into the cattle barn, and you just know the truth of what the Bible is telling you, and how it empowers the human race, and how it is given to us, all the secrets and the mysteries of the brotherhood of Christ to use in the end times when things are really going to get bad, then it becomes an enlightenment. And you start saying, oh, so now I see why, Virgo it's the Sphinx. It's Virgo, the head of the Virgin, and the tail end of the lion. That's the Sphinx. And then you just start seeing the truth. Jacob slept under the stars, and when he woke, and it was in Genesis 28:17, he says, oh, I perceive that these are the gates of heaven, which is the zodiac. Religion doesn't allow the zodiac in the church. Right. And there's a reason, because they don't want you to know the truth. If you weren't afraid of the zodiac, if you're a Christian, then you would learn the truth. You would start putting it together when you read the Bible, and you would say, wow, this sounds like zodiac. He's describing the seals as the zodiac. And he says he puts his prophecy in the stars. So when you guys are translating our horoscopes and doing all the magic you're doing, it's written that you guys, the fortunes are in there, our futures and the prophecies of God is actually in there. And so there's nothing to be afraid of. It's not divination.
Right. Well, okay, I'm a little biased on this, but I think that if somebody's going to do that, theoretically, they should really know what they're doing.
Oh, of course.
That's just, I think it goes without saying. And we're living in a really interesting time where astrology is just exploding all over the place, and especially on
spiritism.
Tick and talk, right? So you've got TikTok, but on TikTok, you have this whole like wave of TikTok astrology, and most of them are very, very young, and they're getting their teeth into astrology, and some of them might have some innate skills or gifts around it. Like we all have innate gifts and skills around certain things. I did with astrology when I was young. I just kind of understood it immediately, but to be able to contextualize it in a way that is or accountable, I think is something that is really important. And there are astrologers who will tell you to do certain things, or there are astrologers who will predict certain things that may be a reflection of their own spirit. And that's when it gets really tricky, in my humble opinion, or maybe not so humble opinion. I don't know. That's just a bit of an aside. Isn't there a quote in the Bible, and I was trying to find it, where Jesus says something to the effect of, you shall know a man from the place of his birth, or something like that? Isn't there a quote in the Bible about that?
Sounds kind of familiar. Because they did say at one point that Christ was a Galilean, and they said, does anything good come out of Galilee? Because it was a very sinful place. I think it's a verse that says you'll know a man by his fruits, and there is a verse that says that there are gifts of the Spirit. And when you're talking about the gifts, you are correct. There's a lot of people that are just teaching the spiritism, which could be demonic forces, and they can't tell the difference because they're very deceptive, like an angel of light, like Satan. But you have the whole, if that's your gift, like that's your gift, that's Jay's gift. It's good. It's the light. You have the wise men. And if you look at what the wise man is translated to as magi, and the magi studied the stars. They read the stars and the prophecies, and they knew to find Christ. So, but that was their gift, their talent. Like you would have been a wise man, like that would have been something you did. Not everybody has that gift. So if you're playing with it, you can open a lot of bad doors, like with tarot cards and things, because it's a gift of powers. And so you have to be very careful with it, and you have to know that that's your gift and what forces you're working with.
Right. Well, about 20 minutes ago, I asked you if I could swear. And the reason I was going to ask you that was like, if people knew that if they connected the dots and understood the Bible in a way that you're understanding it, and the net effect of that would be to open up portals or teleport or, experience this Harry Potter kind of shit. That's what I was going to say. Right. That the Bible would become a lot more popular in some ways. Right. And not necessarily for people to rule or have dominion over others, but in a time like this, which is what you brought up in the spiritual warfare.
Right.
Like, because we're dealing with, not, a war between people, but principalities, right?
Right.
And powers. And
we fight not against flesh and blood, right?
Right. Now, there is that. And there is also the zombie army that's out there that is being assembled. In my opinion, this is what's happening. And you want to look to migration and what's going on with the borders. We all know
by my
that there,
house,
right.
yeah.
We
I
all
see
know
it.
there are people who have lives that suck, and they live in countries that make it very difficult for them to have a reasonable standard of living. Right. So
Right.
I want to just put those people aside for a moment. And so they're there, right? And their governments and our government and the corporations of the world are just as culpable for their condition. Right. That said, they're not the only people coming here. Right. That said, we are getting a multitude of people. And when I see something like that, maybe it's because it's Sunday, I don't know. What I begin to see is the assemblage of an army, and not just any army, but an army that's at the disposal of like one man, right? And this is what we're dealing with here. And if we're going to get through these times, like, it's great. We have the Second Amendment. We have, theoretically, our weapons to protect us from somebody coming into our house. That may not be enough. Right. That may not be enough. And, for us to really get through this time, we're going to need the armor of God. We're going to need to have something that.
And you want to know what the armor of God is?
Lay it on us.
So actually, in this book, it talks about what the true armor of God is. And oh my gosh, we'll keep talking and I'm going to actually find it for you and it's going to blow your mind.
Well,
because I always thought it was just good spiritual gifts.
Right. Yeah, it's probably something way more sophisticated than that.
It's actually the Talk Project.
The Talk Project. Oh, yeah. There you go. There it is, right there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So like every single word related to an ancient code, like a shield. So the shield actually was 2 shields, and which was the 2 original Talk formations, and like everything related to like the compass that was on it. And the Bible talks about the compass all the time. Put the compass in the priesthood. I'm getting off your track.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
But yeah, so Talk was the translation after I translated the Armor of God, which I thought was going to be a finale to my book. And it turned out to actually be the Talk Project, which made me feel a little embarrassed. Because I felt like it should have been something different, but it wasn't.
What did you think it should have been?
I thought it should have been like, like spiritual gifts, like the faith, the shield of faith, like knowing the word of, like believing that Christ was our savior and that no matter what happens, nothing can separate us, and that we got this power through Christ. And it wasn't. It was actually the Talk Project. It actually defined each of the dials, and I was just blown away. Stand firm. The breastplate of righteousness, to be without sin before God, standing with a loving heart. So I thought it was like all this good stuff, but it was actually, the breastplate was Moses's breastplate that he wore with the 12 cubes, which was the zodiac. Right. The shield of faith was, I thought, was trust God, but it turned out it wasn't. It was the shields, which were these, because the shields at the time of the ancient the men that rode the chariots.
Right. Warriors.
Yeah, the warriors was actually 2. And there was everything translated to something else. And I was like, what? There's the belt of truth, which was the actual like Ryan's belt of the zodiac. And there was the feet fitted, which was, where was it? Stand firm, breastplate. Oh, it just goes on. I should have actually.
The feet would be associated with
belt,
Pisces.
Oh, the belt was the robe. So when Moses wears a robe, there's pomegranates on the bottom of the robe. It talks about, and I was always like, what a weird thing to put on a high priest robe. But it turns out that in a pomegranate, there are precisely 613 seeds in every single pomegranate you open, symbolic to relation to the 613 Mosaic laws in the scripture. So they put them on the bottom of the robe to remind the high priest that he is under the law for obedience, and to represent that he's standing in representation of the law. So, which was on the lunar dial. So the lunar dial was actually the belt of truth. The breastplate of righteousness was the solar dial, which was the 12th zodiac. The feet shotted was from Hebrews, put on all things subject under his feet. That is nothing left to put under him. Pronounce the angel. I'm trying to find, boy, I should have really simplified this better. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Oh, the shield of faith was the sun, because the shadow of degrees on the sundial in the high priest on the altar was actually 4 dials. So they always put holiness to the Lord. They put the sundial, a compass, and then the 2 dials of the lunar and the solar dial. And that would cause them to formulate all the powers. But then as you were wielding them, which was the actual true armor of God, which should have been kept in context, and I'm sure the Bible was chopped up a million times, you were brought in more and more dials each time you went in down like the rabbit hole. Then you're like, oh, this is the zodiac. And then when you wielded it with one of the original dials, it started making all the stuff, different stuff, unique stuff, to where all of a sudden it brings in the magical cubit. The cubit in the Bible, you hear about it all the time through the whole Old Testament. The length of this was this cubit and that cubit. So the cubit dial, I am going to pull one out of my little book, because I think this is the part I have not disclosed to the government yet. And I really didn't think I would talk about it, but where is the cubit? I might have to go get one. Oh. So there's many forms of the cubit. And actually what it is, it's the same system of the zodiacs in the gate system, but the survey of heaven system keeps moving and turning, kind of like origami. You can take the same piece of paper and you turn it this way and it does this, and you turn it that way, you turn it upside down and move it. And all of a sudden it starts doing different things. The cubit was a empowerment by degrees of the moon phases, because when they healed, it said that everybody, actually I have that verse here. Oh, that's teleportation. Well, anyways, when he healed, they healed at night. And they said, even when Peter healed and walked through the streets at night, they'd put their sick out in the streets, and that in hopes that the shadow of Peter would pass over them. Throughout the whole Old Testament, you keep hearing the shadow of degree, the shadow of degree. So the lunar cycle that works with the shadow of the sun creates this energy, which then creates a charge. And in the scripture, it's called that the secret group is called the keepers of the charge. And that's what I named the new book, because it actually gives you all the cheats of what moon during what zodiac, to use powers, if the powers are used at night, if the powers are used in the daytime. Like for teleportation, it says don't open the gates until the sun is hot, because you want to go up from the heat of the day. You don't want to go down from the shadow of night. When Christ was crucified, it became dark. That entitled his soul to go down into Hades to release the souls that were down there. Then the sun came out and he was able to bring those souls back up to heaven during his passing. So the sun and the moon and the lunar phases and the zodiac all work with each power. It gives powers. I'm probably jumping all over, so I apologize. There's just so much I'm trying to compress.
No. There's a lot here, and we'll probably have you back on for another another go at this. You're doing great though, and it's really fascinating stuff.
So the full moon for the Paschal moon, is when, okay, quarter moons are healing, because it says Peter healed in the quarters. So every
Right.
quarter moon is the time of healing. The Paschal moon is the gate of invisibility, where all of these people in the scriptures were able to move without being detected. You have, and this is why, like, I think the government was interested, because it produced teleportation during a new moon. It created visibility during a full moon, healing during a quarter moon. During the crescent moons, it performed alchemy. So, and then you have the Gibbons moon, which
Moons, yeah.
was, what power am I missing? Invisibility. Gibbons moon. Holy moly, do I have to look at, it's been a while.
It's okay, but even with, I would assume that the quarter moons would be different, because one quarter moon is waxing, the other quarter moon is waning, right?
Right.
So there would be two different applications.
The
of
only
quarter
thing
moon.
that changes with the quarter moons is the time you can activate the power, because one of the
Okay.
moons rises at noon and the other one actually rises at midnight and sets at noon the next day. So it's only, the only thing that changes with that, because the level of energy coming in through the half moon is the same. It's just the time when you can use it, because it's being produced.
Okay, so there's no delineation between what's happening on the waxing side and what's happening on the waning side, or is it all the same?
Right. And so the Gibbons is, spontaneous movement,
Okay.
which I thought was unique, because teleportation and spontaneous movement was very different. Teleportation brought you into different realms outside of our firmament, where
Right.
spontaneous movement can move you from here to the other side of the globe within our firmament.
Right. What was that?
I'm sorry, that was my phone, and I thought I had it turned off, but I
So
turned it on to show you that photo.
was that like Gabriel, like tooting his horn there? Was that what that was?
It was like Jesus saying, "You win, bingo."
Yeah. So I want to ask you one final question here, because you brought it up about, again, 20 minutes ago, and I wanted to touch on it. It was about the times that we're in right now.
Okay.
And you used a phrase, I think it was that things would be, what was it? Released, was poured out. I mean, you used a certain phrase, and right now Pluto went into Aquarius. It's retrograde, but Aquarius is the water bearer,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
He pours.
yeah, so I think it syncs up with what you were talking about, where this thing, whatever the time that we're in, right? Where whether it's mystery or the contents of eternity, or the time that we've been living, it coming to an end, like it's all coming and being poured out right now
Right.
during the time. And it does have a correlation with the sign of Aquarius, because Pluto, which is a long cycle when it comes to planetary movement, is there and will return again next year after a brief retrograde back into Capricorn. So to get your opinion on that with Pluto and Aquarius, and sort of the times we're in, and the pouring out or the emptying of the heavens, and maybe even the knowledge of the heavens, which is what we're bringing tonight.
Yeah. So each gate holds a power. Ephraim, again, is at the top. That's the throne of God. That's the highest level you're going to go. Then there's like 4 water, and each one is, because there's 4 types of water. I mean, science says there's more, but God says there's not. There's the rain and the types of water that come. So whenever you hear in the Bible, whenever you hear that one of the disciples or apostle heard thunder and lightning, and then they heard voices, he's hearing from the throne of God, because that is the actual water gate for thunder, lightning, the clouds. So there's always going to be thunder when God speaks, because that's his realm. Then you have the water gate, which Ezekiel says it was so deep he couldn't cross over, because water is a protected agency, and you probably know, if you dabbled in magic at all, you kind of know water is a protective agency. And the scriptures actually prove that water covers the realms of the below and the fire gates, so that demonic forces that are imprisoned from the time of Noah can't come out.
Right. Yeah.
You have the fountain gate, which is spring waters from the mountains and different. So now you're coming closer. And then you have the rivers and freshwater lakes, which is the east gate. And that's where Christ's throne is. So the water gates are above the firmament. Then you have the horse gate, and that's where the firmament comes in, and that's their gate, and that's where the sun and the moon and the stars come in to play. And so truly, we know from science that the actual zodiac is in the northeastern sphere of our cosmos, and then our planets spinning, or unless you believe in flat earth,
right.
So that is actually the firmament on the east corner from the horse gate. Then you got the sheep's gate, which is where the Christians, believers in God, believers of the word. I can't say Christians, because there was the Hebrews, the Jews, like anybody, the believers. When you go, there's a realm that supposedly Abel went to. Then you had the valley gate, which is earth. That's us. Which again is an earth element. So now you're getting into the earth elements from the air elements. The fish gate, which is below the earth, and that's Hades, where you have to wait to go to judgment before you enter into the gates of heaven. Then you have the old gate, which is where the giants, I don't know if you believe in giants, the Bible talks about them. They were I'm sorry, what?
I do, absolutely.
Okay, so they were the offspring of the Nephilim, the fallen angels, with humans, and they created these very large beings. So after the flood of Noah, they were imprisoned under the earth. And then again, there were more angels that fell to take women as wives and made more giants, because after the flood, we continued to see their bloodlines go through the scriptures. But the ones that are in prison can't come out. They're like on a block until from water gates are protecting them, because it's like an ark. So the water gate kind of blocks them from entering into our realm until the trumps start to blow that are recorded in Revelations. Then the next gate is the prison gate. That's where Satan and his fellows go, all the fallen angels. Not all of them, because more fell. So there's still more out in the universe. But when you said zombies, it reminded me of the book of Daniel, because it says that the last age will be clay and iron. And we are clay, because we were taken from the dust of the earth, and God breathed into our nostrils and gave us life. The iron is actually the Nephilim, translated back to Hebrew, the Nephilim, which are the fallen angels, which either are, I'm not sure exactly how they're doing it, but they could be entering clones that are being created. They could be just spirits that are inhabiting the human beings of the governments and corruption, because it does say in the Old Testament that in the end times, demons will hide behind men as shelter from the wind, meaning bind to them. So you have this age where there's like a whole nother species, and it says that these fallen angels they will govern the world, but they will not cohabitate with the humans. They'll keep their eliteness, but they'll rule us. And so I kind of wonder if that's what we're seeing now, because it seems that way. They don't really intermix with us. They're kind of on a different level or a different plane than us.
Right. Yeah.
But then you have the 11th gate is Mifka, or no, I'm sorry. You have the 10th gate, which is the dung gate. And the scriptures say that only trash burns, but anybody who's spiritually good is refined like gold. So the dung gate is the lake of fire that the Bible talks about for damnation.
Right.
Then you have the 11th gate, which is Mifkad, which is translated archives. So everything, all of our deeds, all of our actions, our birthrights, our not our social security numbers. No, our DNA, everything is recorded there on who we're going to be, what we're going to do, and then what we do with it with our free will. is recorded in the books. So you have the Book of Life. Hopefully all of our names are in there. That's in the archives, the Mifkah gate. Then, of course, you're back to Ephraim, which is at 12 o'clock, back to rain. And so the wind gates crisscross it. We already talked about them being the horses. And so each of those element gates carry the element of the sustainability properties that created everything in creation. And God made man last, so he couldn't take any credit for anything that was created in creation. So everything was created first, animals, water, land. That way we can't say we did it. Then the next level to get to those outer gates is the zodiac. And that's, each zodiac is affiliated to an element. And so when you get to the inner circle, which I didn't publish this either yet, but there's an inner group of stars, and 3 stars make up each one of the zodiac. And there are ancient listings of stars on the inner tracks, and each one produces a certain amount of element within that zodiac. And so it kind of works as a farmer's almanac, according to reading the stars, so that the people knew when there would be a harvest, when there would be a famine. So Jacob knew, no, it wasn't Jacob, Joseph knew that there was going to be a famine for 7 years in Egypt. And so he had them store up 7 years of good corn. So during the 7 years of famine, they would have food. And that's from the production of the inner star system, with that are 3 stars within each of the zodiac, that gives us the time frame of when we'll have water, when we'll have drought, earth, which would be the drought, winds, or fire, which is more of a charge, like energizing the earth. And so each one of those systems give us a little bit of clue on what to look out for as time goes on. And of course, the system brings us into the end of the 6,000 years in Leo. But it does, the Bible, everyone always says, but we're supposed to end in Aquarius. And then the esoteric religions, they do say Aquarius ends our age. And it kind of does.
It's also the opposite sign of Leo too. So
right. But
yeah.
So that's exactly it. So what it is, it's the lake of fire. So when the wrath is over, Gog and Magog is a type of spontaneous combustion. So when fire spontaneous combusts, it turns into water. Water overflowed the earth before it was created. When God created the heavens and the earth, it says in 2 Timothy that the earth was overflown with water. And so the water had to abate the earth in order for creation to come. And God separated the waters in the beginning of Genesis and the creation laws. And in the end times, he's promises from the rainbow, he will not produce a flood again. But it will be, the final destruction will be through fire, which comes from the dung gate when it's opened from Leo. So when Leo, which is exactly the opposite, erupts on the trump of the 7th trump, meaning the final hour, it'll release the charge into the dung gate, which then the block will come off, and then fire will come up. It says it goes up into the heavens, but it comes down in through our inner earth and out through the wind gates and consumes the earth from inside out. And then a new earth will be created, and we'll all at that point already be segregated to our own realms before judgment, and it goes on and on from there. And then a whole nother age begins. So we do end in Aquarius, even though Leo ends time as we know it, the finality occurs in Aquarius.
So it's interesting. I don't know if you're aware of what they're finding. Do you know about the permafrost that's like really far north,
No.
beyond Canada? Okay, so
like the North
there's this thing
Pole?
called yeah, it's approaching the North Pole region. So there's this thing called permafrost, which is this kind of aggregation of like frozen mud, right? Permafrost.
Okay.
And what they've been finding is that this permafrost is being um, they're finding much higher levels of methane
Okay.
escaping from this permafrost. And methane is one of the things that theoretically can lead to spontaneous combustion, right? So this whole thing about fire that you're talking about, there's actually like geophysical evidence that we're dealing with more methane coming into our realm than at any time before, right? And methane is it's gas, it's spontaneously combusting gas.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that's a really, I'm just giving you feedback that that's going on with the realm. The other thing that you brought up, which I thought was like, oh, water. This is interesting. So when you were talking about Watergate,
Mhm.
I was thinking of Nixon. I was thinking
Yeah,
of Richard
everyone
Nixon
says that. They go, oh yeah, we know about Nixon. Yeah.
in the Watergate Hotel, right? So yeah, but it's more than that though. That the Watergate Hotel, if this is connected to this, so that's where the whole Nixon thing starts, and it's like a ritual, right?
Mhm.
It's a ritual through the Watergate, and Nixon is a Capricorn, so he's the goat, right? And he becomes the
Right.
sacrificial goat for, you name it, like an entire generation or a group of people that wanted to perform some kind of operation. And what was going on in Watergate, it's a little off topic, was that there were actually, the Democrats were there and they were having underage girls and perhaps even boys that were at the Watergate Hotel. So they had like all the goods on the Democrats who were having a convention. That's what was going on there. Right. And so they had, film, and they had all this evidence that could absolutely just rip a hole in the Democratic Party. And then what happened is they flipped it and they said, okay, we can't have this. We're going to go after Nixon. And because they were using the wiretaps and everything there, they obscured or obfuscated what was really happening. And then they went and they took out Nixon. And Nixon, I think, like Andrew Jackson was impeached, right? But I'm not sure if he was removed. We had Clinton who was impeached, one count. We had Trump who's been impeached 12 times or something, but them have been removed. Nixon's the only one, I think, maybe since Jackson, that was removed, which is very unusual. So that is the death of the president. And Nixon being a Capricorn, he's also Saturn, right? So it's a very interesting. I never made the connection between the Watergate and the Watergate Hood. I've always thought that the Nixon piece was really much bigger than just getting rid of a guy that they didn't like. And I've laid out some things about that that has to do with the goat and the father and Capricorn and the slaughter of the father, things like that. This gives it another kind of layer for me to look through.
Well, the Bible does, it is written that Jesus says, even now the kingdom of heaven is taken by force. And so that brings me to, if you've seen the cabal. So we all know that the cabal is running a lot of the governments. You kind of know about the cabal, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't really want to talk about them. I don't want them to hurt me.
You got protection. Come on now.
Okay.
You're all dialed up.
So we all know the ancient symbol of the Jewish cabal.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So the difference is back in the ancient time before Christ actually came, and actually was the last blood sacrifice ever needed to break the curse of death and cover our sins, because it is written, cursed is he who is nailed to a cross. And they nailed and crucified him to a wooden cross, which was made of a tree, which then, because he was innocent, broke the curse. So I don't want to go into religion, but that's how the curse is broken. And so once he opens the gates of Hades, everyone prior to Christ at that moment went to Hades, whether you were a believer, you weren't a believer, it didn't matter. Now the realms are segregated. So the fallen angels, the demons, the giants, the humans, they can't interact because of the water systems. they put like a level between them for protection. So you can't be tormented once you die, no matter where you go, if you're a human. So they, once Christ came, everybody in the Old Testament went to Hades no matter what. And that's why the Egyptians were always trying to be the gods of the underworld in the future by doing all these things for the gods of the underworld.
Right.
Like, because they wanted the favoritism so they could be rulers in the next life, because they didn't know anything other than the underworld. But that was how it was. When Christ came and he opened up the gates so we can go to a higher level now, then this ancient Cabal system changed, because this system is the gate system but it's not art, but it's the gate system without the water gates. So every gate that is in the system from the heavens, in the survey of the heavens with water, air, earth, and fire are all here, but even the winds are here, but there's no water gates so that go down, because the winds fan the fires in the lower realms. You have the earth from the different foundations. You have obviously the fire, because that's what makes them the fire realms and the lower realms. And you have the air, which is in the wind itself. And so that ancient system that people are still practicing is kind of like if you went under the law of the Old Testament instead of under grace in the New Testament, where you lived by spirit and the grace of and mercy from Christ, because now we have the water gates in a higher level and we don't go to the lower level. So I thought that was kind of
interesting. That is interesting. That is a very interesting.
So
in the Watergate Hotel, even the name Watergate is interesting.
So when you were talking about the water, and I'm thinking, oh, well, water's cut off of the Cabal, and that's the old system of religion. So I thought I would just throw that in there.
That is interesting. So as I was looking at your wheels, I just kept thinking about Ezekiel. And is Ezekiel talking about these wheels? Is that what's going on here?
Yeah. So
wheels within wheels.
I'll try to. It's this one. Okay. So I'm moving my computer, but it's actually, so there's so many. So you're seeing tons and tons of different ones that keep developing out of different ones. And I'm actually on the final, and I'm working in Alchemy right now, which is producing its own wheel, which keeps making me crazy because, I'm made a lot of wheels. So yeah, Ezekiel says it was like a wheel. So he sees a chariot, which is the whole tree of life. And he says it's a wheel within a wheel. So the outer wheel is all the element gates, which are the gates in heaven that God used for creation. And those are the elders. So when God says the 24 elders bowed down in heaven in Revelations, he means the 12 element gates, the 12 zodiac, lower their gates to earth when they bow down. When the 24 elders in heaven bow down before God, he's given them direction and instructions on how much element to put into our realm by measure. And so they bow down, meaning the gates come down. When they stand up, the gates go up. So Ezekiel is talking about a wheel within a wheel, and that is the tax system. And then he starts talking about each one. Like he says, he came to a door and he opened it and there was water up to his ankles, and he took a step and it went up to his knees and his chest. And then he realized no man could pass this water. And that's the water gate, which is salt water. And he actually talks about all the different gates, which is really interesting. It kind of gives you a little rundown of what's inside of each one and what to expect.
And the whole thing with salt water and fresh water is really interesting, right? It's just one of those things you just take it for granted that the ocean, well, they're just salt water,
Right.
But then everything else is fresh water, right? Or non-salt water. Well, why is that? Why isn't it all salt water, or why isn't it all just fresh water?
Right.
Yeah.
There's the rain, like the rains, which is considered snow, and the dew, the morning dew, and rain and sleet, and all that's from Ephraim, the rain gate. And that's why you always hear thunder. Then, yeah, you got salt water, you got spring waters, and you got fresh water. So
Right.
it's just, yeah, it's like, okay, we need it all. But then the charge, because they crisscross each other, there's a system to the charge that empowers us through the degree of the sun
Right.
and what zodiac gets rising in what house, and the moon phase that's coming out that will determine on what power you can use, whether you use it at night, whether you use it during the day.
Yeah.
And the whole system is just, it's just mind-blowing. It's just mind-blowing.
So when did Talk get published? When was this? When was it first
Okay,
published?
so I would think the first Talk book got published in 2016. Actually, the first 2 Talk books got published in 2016. And so what that was is the first one was they kind of got the same covers almost, but they're a little bit different. One's got a burnt effect. So one actually shows you the codes in the scripture so you could see them for yourself. And then the other one, and how the formulas were produced to produce each dial. Then this one actually shows you how some of the activity that took place, like the destruction of our house and different experiments that kind of went array, and different terminologies on how to, it's called the Emmanuel for TAC, which was kind of supposed to be the manual on how to wield it. But then when I finished it, at this time, I only knew of teleportation. And so that's the only power being worked at this point, because I thought I was done, and I thought that's all the dials did. I was already with the general. Okay, I was already in DC working on stuff at this time, but I thought that it only produced teleportation. Then one day I woke up. Oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. I woke up and I saw like this board in front of me. It was like I was still kind of asleep, and it had all these math formulas on it. And I had a cup of coffee and it just disappeared. And then I called my friend and I said, I think there's more to TAC than teleportation. And that's when I started doing some more codes, going through more chapters and books of the Bible. And then I'm like, but I'm seeing water, and I'm seeing alchemy, and I'm seeing healing. And it was like kind of like the Egyptian flower of life. It did all these powers. And I'm like, but which one does it do? I don't know. And I couldn't, but then all of a sudden I realized it does it all. And I was like, wow. So that's when I did this one, and I put down, and I put cheat codes. I put pictures of the moons and the phases. So that way somebody, and I explained how Revelations is teaching you that the horses are horse riders from Zechariah to Revelations, how the zodiac come into play, how the trumps are going to release the elements because they go in order of the elements. And this one of the most amazing things is the 7 spirits of God. Did I bring that one? There's a lot of neat tricks in a lot of my books. Like in the first one, I actually put all the biblical numerics so you can understand what numbers mean.
Right.
But okay, so in the Spirit of God, there's all these little phrases in the Bible that if you go to the church and you ask the minister and you say, well, what is the 7 spirits of God? And they're like, oh, it's 7 good morals, or it's 7 this or that. Well, I don't buy into that. You know, if my soul doesn't convict me, they don't have a chance.
Right.
So I wish I was that smart on street smart. But then I found out that in it, from Ephraim at 12 o'clock all the way to 6 o'clock in the Valley Gate on the right-hand side is 7 gates, which are all the good gates that aren't the fire gates and aren't the sin gates and aren't the punishment gates. And so those are the 7 spirits of God. And those are the 7 gates that all the trumps come from, and all the plagues that come upon the earth in the end times. They're all coming from the 7 gates on the right-hand side. And so God always says, like, I hold you in my right-hand side, or like it's always been known, like the sheep are on the right side and the goats are on the left, meaning not so good. And that's how it is in the charge. the good gates and the good elements that we need every day and rely on are actually charged by the fire gates. And there's a whole system to when they're being charged and what the atmosphere and the elements of the earth can produce at what point because of this. And once you know it, then like that's how Christ was able to like disappear when he was being attacked, or everyone just worked the powers of alchemy, turned water into wine.
Right. Yeah. Walk on water. So it was interesting when you use the term wield, right? And then you look behind you, you've got these wheels, right?
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's a whole different take on wield, like WHEELED.
Right. Yeah. That's what the Keepers of the Charge does. It teaches you how to wield the powers of creation. And I think that's why they want to really destroy religion and Christianity. And they want to keep translating the Bible, because the more they translate it, even with the codes missing, even if the dials were published everywhere, you wouldn't be able to wield them without the instructions that are in the manual. You know, they say that the Bible is to give life. It gives life. Well, it does give what? It gives us instructions on how to live better. And
right. Well, clearly there's moral codes inside the Bible, right? I mean,
I meant better, like have water during a drought.
This is a different level. This is a different level.
Different level.
Well, Cheri, this has been so fascinating, and I know we're just literally, sticking our toe in the water here with you. If people wanted to find your books and find out more about you, how do they go about doing that?
Amazon has all my books.
Okay.
There's 8 of them. So.
Okay. All right. And do you do any kind of teaching? Do you have any webinars that you do around this stuff, or are the books really your teaching?
Actually, I'm just kind of coming out with the charge and the final finale. I did a couple podcasts prior, and I did tell Heather Wade from the John Lear show that I was going to give her exclusive rights, but apparently their show is no longer, because I took my time on doing, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. Right. Between trying to do patents, and which we never really got into the story, but we could do that another time.
Yeah, we'll have you back on again, and we'll go deeper into the, and maybe what we could do is put together some really good graphics.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Now that I've done this with you, I kind of have an idea of what type of graphics I would like to produce, and then put little numbers on them and say, okay, well, go to number 6, and then you could put it up. Because I'm seeing, like, even though I have the dials, I think some charting would help and make things a little easier to understand.
Well, if I were you, here's what I would do. I would try to hire somebody who could do some, I wouldn't call it high level animation, but animation that would allow you to blend sort of the numbers, the keywords, the codes, and what's happening on the wheel, so that it can kind of move together across the screen, right?
Well, that would be fun.
Yeah, it'd be cool, right? And it's not impossible. There are people that can help you do that.
Yeah, that would be fun.
You get some of those teaching tools in your wheelhouse, as they say, your work would really take off and could reach so many people. So yeah, we live in an optical age. We live in an information age, like what we're doing right. It's not to say that your books aren't important, and people should say, well, I'm just going to wait for the video. No, go support or get the books. But this is pretty much how we're transmitting.
Yes, I always feel like I'm so busy doing the books because I'm still finishing the alchemy portion and wielding the charge. Yeah. And even the healing portion, like those two are like what's left. So I can honestly say some of the powers have been tested and they do work. But now I want to work with the alchemy. And so I feel like as a researcher, I just have to keep moving. And unfortunately, life kind of got in the way recently. We had some events, but I feel like I need to hire other staff to do some other portions of that I just don't have the time to do.
Right. And you know what? Given your work and given your connection to this stuff and given some exposure, you'll see people show up, I'm sure, who will say, hey, I can help you with that.
That would be
So
awesome.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to share before we say goodnight? You go back into your Arizona night.
Oh, thank you. No, we'll just fill in the blanks and the gaps next time.
Great. Looking forward to it. And in the meantime, be careful with those powers.
No,
Okay?
you bet.
And if you're going to teleport somewhere, make it, I don't know, the Maldives or something like that.
My children always say, Mom, was whatever you do, don't pop in on us. You'll freak us out.
Yeah, that would be.
I'm like, okay, I won't.
Yeah, that's enough, Mom. Okay, you take good care, Cheri. And
Thank you, you too, Robert.
We'll see you back on here some other time soon. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. What a great show that was. Wow. At least a great portion of the show. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to take in there, right? And, she's like this mad scientist with all these wheels. And you know that she knows how to work the wheels. And you know the information is in those books. And if you were committed to learning this stuff, well, I'm really open to it, man. Like when I hear this, and then there's a connection with astrology and the zodiac, which is becoming clearer here, right? It's like there's a reason why they tell you to not look over there, right? There's a reason why they tell you don't look at this, don't do this. Why? Why? Is it because they want you to? They're concerned that you're going to wind up in one of the lakes of fire, or are they concerned that you're going to find out that as you go through a particular process and you understand the process and it becomes part of your spirit, when it becomes part of your spirit, you cannot be corrupted. This is the important piece. Now, I'm not saying that I have gone through what she's gone through, but there was a time in my 20s where I went through something in my own way. In my own way, I went through a really intense initiation, purification. My life changed. I had a lot of phenomena happen to me during that period of time. And it had to do with the fact that I was going through a different gate. It was still centered around this idea of this being Christ, right? It was centered around not just the idea. I don't want to get into the weeds too much with it, but it was a huge part of my life from when I was about 21 to about 24. And coincidentally, it coincided with the final degrees of Neptune conjuncting my chart. When I go back as an astrologer and I look at that time, I go, well, this is why, I can explain this. This is why I was going through this phenomenon during that time. But one of the things that that really kind of solidified this idea for me was that I became a better person, right? So there were these really cool things that were happening, but I wasn't. Well, there were a couple times. There were a couple times where I think I got a little cocky, and I should have backed off a little bit. But by and large, I was a better person, and I would say more humble during that time, but not in a humble way like, well, I had to debase myself or something. It was just kind of like, you know what? I'm really grateful that I'm in this period of grace and I'm learning these things and I'm experiencing these things. And I don't know how I can share this with people because I really couldn't share with a lot of people. It was very personal, but it was happening, right? So I know it can happen. I had my own little slice and version of it. And it was interesting because once Neptune went into Capricorn, it kind of did for me. It moved off of Jupiter, and it was kind of like, okay, you had this opening, you had time, and it's like, what would you do with it, right? That's really what it came down to. And it felt, I wouldn't say I felt lost, but it felt I could feel the difference. I didn't know astrology, but by the time I started to hit 1985, right, when Neptune really goes into Capricorn, like it's moved on. And I feel like in some ways, well, I wouldn't say I felt like abandoned, but it was like, man, I am not in that place anymore. And I'm in a different part of my experience in life. But during that time, that's what I felt. And so I think that the process here, I'm just in the process on her end, that if you go through something like this, and let's just, for the sake of agreeing, say that this is really legit, right? Like she's really cracked some codes here, and she's figured out that these are the thing, right? These are the elements, the spiritual elements, the elements of earth itself, right? These are the elements that we need in order to claim our righteousness, to claim our holiness, right? To claim our inheritance, our spiritual inheritance, so that we can get off of our knees and deal with this world in a way that honestly we need. You know, looking around and nobody's going to come. Nobody's going to come. No white hats are going to roll up and save the day. They're not coming. Right? Sorry. That's my belief. Maybe it's a limited one, but it's my belief. It's up to us. We're the ones that are going to have to figure this thing out. And I don't believe that we have to be slaughtered. I don't believe in that. I don't believe it to be slaughtered in order to fulfill a prophecy. Right? I don't believe that we have to relive the sacrifice, quote unquote, Christ by the millions in order to fulfill some sort of religious prophecy. I don't believe that. Right? That's already done. And when it comes to the rapture, I mean, come on, right? It's like the most disempowering fucking thing I've ever heard. This is, oh, you just got to do this, and guys just got to go here and go to church here and just keep looking for the signs. Oh yeah, look at that. Here's another sign. Jesus is coming. Oh, I just can't wait. I just can't wait. Jesus comes. When Jesus comes, I'm going to be up there. I'll be up there in my Barker Lounger with a big gulp and some popcorn, and I'm going to watch all hell on earth break loose. I'll have a front row seat. It'll be Technicolor, baby. We're going to watch Christ come in there and whoop ass, right? Like kind of watching Auburn versus Alabama once a year, right? I mean, it's kind of like that. I don't think that's how it works, man. This is just my limited perception, perhaps, but it's so disempowering. So you have two models of disempowering. Well, maybe after that, you get to come back down here and you get to live out the 1,000 years of peace, and okay. But they're models of disempowerment. This is not a model of disempowerment. This is a power of big empowerment. Big empowerment. B-E-B. And I'm going to check it out. I think I might buy her books, man. Just get into it and see what I can learn from an astrological side of things. We put some of the stuff that, my kind of savant astrology journey has brought to me. Put some stuff together here. Because when I'm telling you, the shit hits the fan, we're gonna need the big guns. We're gonna need the big spiritual cannons here to deal with these people. And it's great being armed. It's helped keep a wedge between us and our transgressors. But that edge, I think, is creeping closer and closer to being irrelevant. Whether they go after the guns, which is really what they want to do, or they're producing, the zombie army. And we're dealing with, you name it, right? I mean, we could be dealing with these China's version of their super soldiers, where they're editing through CRISPR genes, or whatever, man. We don't even know what's in store for us. And I don't like to live in fear, but I do like to live with a sense of what can happen. And the motto here is to be prepared. And there's no better preparation, I think, than investing at the level that we just dipped our little toe in here. I'm all in with that. I'm all in, right? And there is, I think, a process that ultimately when you go through this, because you can't go through it without the spiritual instruction, and that you're tempered along the way. So when the time comes, and the phrase, with great power comes great responsibility, you have been engaged at that level. And there's no way that you're going to hopefully abuse the power, right? Because you wouldn't necessarily get it, I think, if you were going to abuse it. That's my sense. And you're tested every now and then, because we are tested every now and then. Anyway, I found it to be really exciting, and we'll bring her back on. And maybe the next time she'll have some really nice visuals and kind of, blend this stuff together, which would, I think, take everything to another level. Okay. Where are we? We're at 9:00. What do I want to do? A lot of you people have been around for 3 hours. I keep putting this other stuff off, but I feel like I feel like this is really a good cap on tonight's show. I still want to talk about Jupiter and Taurus. I'm not sure I want to do it tonight, because I think there's a lot to cover. Let me give you a rundown, because I've been looking back on Jupiter and Taurus cycles. And you would think that there would be a great largesse of either money or material possessions, yada, 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 right? I did not find that to be true. I didn't see a lot of boom cycles during Jupiter and Taurus. I'll tell you what I did find. I found that during Jupiter and Taurus, some people didn't do very well. I'm like, well, why is this? Why is this? That's here's my reason why. Like, you go back to 2001. 2001, there was a Jupiter conjunction in Taurus. So there's expansion and limitation. It was like the last Jupiter-Saturn cycle when they were conjunct, right? 2001 is when basically Alan Greenspan kept raising interest rates. So the dot-com market just collapsed. Like, the whole idea behind the dot-com market was that and I was there, I was part of a business, I was in that cycle, and you were getting first round funding, second round funding, some businesses third round funding. But the key with all those rounds of funding is that you had 1 year to spend it. If you didn't spend it, it went back to the people that were setting up the funding, right? It was a big deal. So those businesses that were all popping up like mushrooms, circa 97, 98 in California, Silicon Valley, most of them had half-baked ideas. And maybe had they been given more time, they would have really been fleshed out, right? Well, instead of having a 1 year cycle to prove our product and build on our market share, let's kind of dole this money out. And so we could have 3 years and develop our product. Well, the terms and conditions on the funding didn't call for that, right? So you had people saying, okay, we got all this money out, what do we do? So there's a rush to hire coders, and everybody's trying to hire coders and tech people and try to model out and go public. And that's what happened. These businesses went public, like M.com. And when it went public, I think it set a record for one of the highest valuated IPOs. And that's where the money was being made. The money was being made on the IPOs. The money was being made by the people that were basically funding these businesses. And then they bring in these arbitrageurs. The arbitrageurs would take the companies public. And the people that set up the arbitrageurs, plus the original founders of the companies, were getting shares for pennies on the dollar. So, for instance, if you were somebody like I don't know, let's say Bear Stearns, who was still in business back then. Let's say you were Bear Stearns, you were setting up an arbitrage, so you could take mp3.com public. Bear Stearns would get mp3.com stock, and it'd be like worth half a cent, and they'd get, I don't know, 50,000 shares, which is with a company like this kind of nothing in some ways. 100,000 shares, but when it would break, and I forget what the opening price was. I think it might have been around $50 or something. It could have been more. I forget. But now you add it up, right? You got half a cent, and then you get this major IPO. It was all the IPO game. And the people that did the arbitrages, they had absolutely zero restrictions on their IPO, right? Zero. So as soon as that stock went up, they could sell their shares. You bet your ass they did. You bet your ass they sold those shares, unless they thought it was a long-term play. Trust me, most of these companies or most of these arbitrageurs knew that it was going to be a short-term play. Then you had the founders who had a lot of shares at a very low price. And the founders had some restrictions on their shares. And it was frowned on. It's called a pump and dump, right? So it was frowned upon if you were a founder to sell your shares, because you wanted to keep the stock price high. You wanted to embody confidence in your company and your product, right? So it was like, no, man, don't sell your shares. Don't sell your shares. Don't sell your shares. Keep your shares intact. Meanwhile, the market is starting to go down, right? They're starting to go down. And there is panic in some of these companies because they're saying, shit, what are we going to do? We got to make some money with these founder shares. I mean, we're the ones that put the idea together. We're the ones that had to put up these assholes that loaned us the money. We're the ones that put the arbitrage together. We're the one that brought it public, right? A lot of blood, sweat, and tears in that. And then in a lot of cases there are. So what are we going to get out of this thing? Because this thing is, it's the elevator's going down fast. And what happened was, and this is where Wozniak got in trouble. It's called backdating or backlisting your stock. So, for instance, let's just say I knew some executives that did this. I'm not going to name any names or any companies. I know some executives that did this. And so they had their founder shares. And what they did is they backlisted their founder shares, not at the price that the company was either purchased at or they sold at, which was in the gutter. No, they backlisted it to an earlier date when the stock was higher. That's how backlisting works. And that's what happened. And this is what would get people in trouble, right? But that was all happening with Jupiter and Taurus. You have Saturn there, who the people that are making the fucking money, right? Yeah, we're going to crash your market. We're going to, and then what would they do? They would go back in and buy these companies for pennies on the dollar. Pennies on the dollar. Where did we see that? We saw that during the Great Depression. And all the so-called made men like Joe Kennedy got out of the market. They were out of the market 8 months before it went down. And then it crashes and they go back in, they buy everything for pennies on the dollar. What happened in 2001 was a minor version of that. Minor version. Well, no, I would say minor. No, it was a minor version. It wasn't a minor because a lot of people were affected by that. And it was that shitbag Alan Greenspan who did it. He just kept incrementally raising the interest rates, which made it harder to get the secondary and tertiary rounds of funding. And if you didn't get a big fat couple of rounds before that happened, you're pretty much done. Right? Your business might last another year if you were lucky, because most of those businesses were really green, super, super green. That was a Jupiter in Taurus cycle. So there were people that made money, right? They made money, but it wasn't the everyday people that made money. It was during that with Saturn, it was the elites that made money. So you would think that, well, that's a special case because it was Saturn Jupiter conjunction. You fast forward, you go to 2012, Jupiter's in Taurus. Does anybody remember 2012 being a banner year for finances? I certainly don't. Right? I don't. I remember 2012 as actually being a very difficult year. There was some shit that went down in 2012 that you had towards the end of the year in 2012, you had whatchamacallit, Newtown, Connecticut, right? The kids, Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook happens in 2012. Sandy Hook happened. The Aurora shooting with the Batman shooting happens in 2012. 2012 is a heavy year, by the way. If you really get down and look at 2012, you know what happens else in 2012? The second 9/11. The Libyan embassy happens in 2012. This is all Jupiter and Taurus stuff, right? Has nothing to do with economy, has nothing to with money. And I know we're also in that kind of grand cross time, right? The grand cross with Uranus and Saturn. Later on, Jupiter moves into that. Jupiter goes into Cancer, what is it, around 2013, 2014. It's more applicable there. Saturn in Libra, Uranus in Aries, Pluto in Capricorn, and Jupiter in Cancer. I think it's around 2013, 2012 is not that. 2013, I think, is Jupiter in Gemini. 2014 is Jupiter in Cancer. I just don't remember people like, really experiencing a lot of, and maybe some people were. This is another thing. This is an interesting piece, and I'm gonna bring this up because I hadn't thought about this, but and I have to go back and backdate it or backlist it. No, but under Obama, there was a ton of pressure on banks to lend to minorities. It was a big deal under Obama, and these banks were incentivized. Actually, like if you lent, theoretically, you could do quite well, and by playing the game. So I think there was some of that going on during that time. Let me do this really quickly. Washington Mutual. That's the story. And Washington Mutual. So Washington Mutual went funked in 2000. So they're a little ahead of the curve, but they became part of this who else was part of this? Was it Home? Federal Home Loan Bank, that was before Federal Home Loan Bank's history. So there were people that were making money 2012, but it wasn't everybody. Let me just see here. Let's see. Okay. Right. So, okay, I'm just seeing this. That's all right. 2013 is the start of Black Lives Matter. And with Jupiter and Taurus, I believe the funding started to happen. It's 2012. I believe the funding started to happen. And 2013, Jupiter in what sign? Gemini. So it becomes very, very polaric. The engine or the driver for that moment in time is Jupiter in Taurus. So what I'm trying to say here is, and ultimately what happens with Black Lives Matter, fucking rich, right? Think of all the money that was moved through Black Lives Matter, huge amounts of money. I mean, we're talking, I would venture to say that we're getting close to $1 billion probably going through the Black Lives Matter channel, whether it's Share Blue or whatever. You add it all up, and we're getting to a really big number. And the roots of Black Lives Matter are in Jupiter and Taurus. Like they started to kick it off in 2030, but all that stuff, it's an AstroTurf movement. I'm sorry, I may get in trouble on the channel for it, but I'm just going to say it the way it is, because look what happened. At a certain point, this thing became, I don't want to call it an institution. That would not be the right word. But it became a machine, an engine, right? It became an engine to move people's emotions and move people's fears and move people's sympathies, right? And move money, large amounts of money, ultimately. And I think it has its roots in Jupiter and Taurus. So the moral of the story here with Jupiter and Taurus, and I do think that there is some potential, at least here, kind of early on with Jupiter and Taurus, market-wise, house-wise. But don't get attached to the idea that Jupiter and Taurus is going to restore economic favor. I would say, if anything, just based on the last two Jupiter cycles that I saw, that's probably not the case. And that, yes, there are people that make money, but it's not the people who you think make money. Some people always make money and not always want everybody at their party. It was interesting. We went to Bastrop yesterday, and this is a very Jupiter and Taurus event. I mean, I don't know if the promoters decided that they wanted to have it on this weekend, but we went to Bastrop and we hung out with some friends who were attending a conference. And the conference was basically kind of a, get off the grid, and, Bush, who lives in Texas, through this 3-day event. And all these people were there, people that you might know, like Derek Bros was there, and Patrick Wood was there. I think Mike Adams from, his channel, the Truth Ranger, he was there on Friday doing interviews. So, a bunch of people were coming together and like, hey, we really want to do something different here. We want to have a different way of life. We want to create a different model. And I think the motto for the show was stop bitching and start building. But it was all these different people bringing all these kinds of ideas, possibilities, potentialities, and stories of things that didn't work. That all happened under Jupiter and Taurus. And, when you see an event like that, it's like, okay, this is a sign in the signifier of what's coming. And even though it's small, it's happening under a specific time with a specific intent. And I feel like that's really going to be a big part of the Jupiter and Taurus story. More than money and finances, although that I think will play a role. It's going to be more about things like land. And it's going to be more about figuring out how we can work together and get along. I mean, so what happens with Jupiter comes into Taurus, immediately squares Pluto. So and Pluto's in Aquarius. We're dealing with things like groups. We're like, how do individuals work together? Especially here in the West, we're not really good at that. We're good at being individuals. We're good at, well, I can handle that. I'm good at that. right? Other parts of the world, they're better at working together for the most part. Unless you're Amish. If you're Amish, you know what to do, right? They do all that shit all the time. And there are certain subgroups inside of this country that know how to do it. Don't get me wrong. But I would say, by and large, here in the West, with this idea that it's the individual and manifest destiny, and we've got to strike out and create our own fortune, be responsible for our own wants and needs. There's something good about it, but and I've seen this before. You get a bunch of independent people together and put them in a group, and not that chief, but everybody has such a strong sense of either the skill set, their moral compass, and sometimes it's both, that it's very difficult to kind of bring these people together. It's like herding cats in some ways. It's maybe not the best analogy, but that's the one I would use. On the left, and I've said this before, the left naturally congregates to groups. They're not into individualism. They're not into it, right? They are stronger together. They understand this. They gather their strength and their energy from being in a group. So they will sublimate their egoic. They'll sublimate their independence. Let's put it that way. I don't want to say egoic. There's a lot of very egoic people on the left, just as like there are on the right. But they'll sublimate their independence. In many cases on the left, you will find highly dependent people, and then they cluster together, and then they use each other for support, or they'll use each other to network. And trust me, there's power in that. And all they need really is one figure, one person who can give them their marching orders. And as long as their marching orders are agreed upon and within the frame set of the cause, they're like the fucking Borg. Look out, right? I mean, that's where they really execute. We see it all the time here at the Capitol in Austin. All it takes is one person in a leadership role under the auspices of their talking points and their ideology. And as long as they agree, and more often than not, they do. And even if they don't, and I've seen this with the so-called left, they may not agree with something, but because it's the party's bigger than the thing that they don't agree with. Does the right do that? Fuck no. No, they don't. No. There is not that. There's splintered versions of the right. So bringing it back to what we're talking about with Jupiter squaring Pluto, okay, we're going to have this thing, if we're going to do these things, if we're going to build a new communities, if we're going to peel off and, tap out, right? We're going to tap out. We're going to fuck you. We don't need this anymore. Parallel society, parallel system. People are going to need to figure out how to work together. And right out of the gate, Jupiter Pluto squared, that is the story, right? How do we work together? And that's going to be a really interesting part of the story as we move forward. And we were having this really interesting discussion last night, and I'll put it out to you. And maybe you guys can answer in the in the comments of the show. So we were talking about like when you start a new community. And I've kind of been around people like this, right? I've been around that period when I was 24, I went to go visit Findhorn and these other intentional communities. And one of the communities we visited was a place in Wisconsin called High Wind. It was a very small group of people, but boy, were they enthusiastic. They were very enthusiastic because when you start off with something, it's like a mission. It's like, you're in this, very high state. Like it's like, oh man, this is great. We're doing this thing. We're building, the new land or the new world. And there's a kind of spirit that takes over people, like at that stage. It's like the beginning of a hot relationship, right before you figure out like somebody doesn't, put the toilet seat down, put the tube on the toothpaste, whatever that is. And that's what happens when communities start. And I think homesteaders are different than communities. I mean, it's a little bit of a different conversation. Um, but if you're going to homestead, I'm telling you right now, you're going to need a community. You just can't go out with you and your wife and 2 or 3 of your best friends and do it. It's not going to work. I mean, it might for a while, but you're going to need a community. And whether that community is on your land and you've got 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 people that are working together to create something sustainable. And let's face it, we don't always live up our creature comforts, but somewhat elegant, right? You're going to need it, but you're going to need people. And if it's not within the boundaries of your, 5, 10, 15, 20 acre, it's going to be down the road, right? It's going to be down the road or across the road or on the other side of the river, right? That's your community. So you're going to have to work with people regardless. I mean, walling up in a castle is only going to work for the uber freaking rich, who have people to work for them and, 24/7 security, and lots of us don't have that. So we're going to have to, even if it's just you decided to go out, hey, I just want to homestead and get my, my ass off the grid. You're going to need those people around you. You're going to need to store. You're going to need to know, somebody in town that can process animals if you're not going to process your own animals. So communities not go out the window. It's a big part of it. And this is where we're headed, right? We're headed in this direction. And with this Jupiter-Pluto square, at least initially, this is kind of the sound of the gong. And how do we get along? How do we get along? How do we meld the individual spirit? This is all Aquarian stuff too, by the way. How do we meld the individual spirit and synergize with people around us, and that there's no loss of latency for each individual, right? No latency loss or little latency loss. Because sometimes it happens. Sometimes there's latency. Sometimes you can be a part of a community or group early on, and you can be a really big part of it, and then things change, roles change, and then you're not even center. You may be 2 or 3 rows out from the center. Then what happens? Then yourself, right? Let's say there are people that come in and they're really super proficient, and proficient people in a time creating homesteads and things like that become very important and wield a lot of power. When I see proficient people that can do shit, I mean, electricity, those people who have real skills, they become the magicians. They become the technicians, the techno overlords of the homesteading world, because they can do that shit, right? If you can't do that shit, you're not going to get very far. So you're a guy and a few things, but it's limited. Like you may be able to, install a sink or something like that, right? Or maybe you could install a rough kind of, somebody else comes in and has a bunch of skills, right? Like, wow, man, this guy really knows what the fuck he's doing. And when that happens, guess what happens? People look at him and go, wow, man, this guy's really, now we're into alpha world, right? So there's all these things that people don't understand and don't know about. And guess what, right? We get to start to deal with some of this stuff, because if you're going to go down this path and we're going to have these parallel worlds, let's say before we ascend or whatever, we're going to deal with it. And that's one of the things that Aquarius will bring. It will bring this idea of having to figure out who we are as individuals and how do we live in a group and maintain our authenticity, our real authenticity, not some fake bullshit authenticity, but how do we maintain our authenticity and contribute? And there's always kind of a spot for somebody if it's the right spot. Bringing it back to the wheel, there's always a spoke in the wheel. There's always an angle of relating to the center. And as long as you have the right angle of relating to the center, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. It's when you believe that you should be at a different angle of relationship, that's where things get tricky. That's where the spokes break down, right? So know thyself, practice self-awareness, know your limitations, maybe try to get better on them or with them. And then when the time comes, if the time comes, join in. Join in. You're going to have to figure it out anyway, whether it's in an intentional community or a homestead situation. We have to figure it out anyway, because there's macro models of that as well. All right, let's get out of here. I'll be back. I don't know about next Sunday night. I got to tell you, I'm not sure about next Sunday night. We're gonna have to kind of put that on the back burner. We'll see about next Sunday night. I will be back on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday with 15 minutes of flame. We're gonna have Russ Winter on the Friday Forecast. We'll catch up with our good friend Russ, and we'll do some meaty breakdowns of what's happening on a geopolitical level. And so that'll happen. And what else do I need to say? If you want to book a reading with me, go to robertphoenix.com. Tram Science, great sponsor of the show. And if you want to get some best hemp exit, you can go to tramscience.com and then type in 15MINS when you check out. Excuse me, my Virgil's root beer. Good root beer, by the way. Zero sugar Virgil's. I highly recommend root beer. Virgil's. And it's that's some, secret shit. 15 minutes when you check out, you get free goodies. Free goodies. So $100 or more, and type in 15 minutes to get free goodies. All right, I'm out of here. Thank you, mods, for your help. As always, really appreciate your work. Please like the show. Share the show if you want to turn your friends on to an overly long. No, it's not overly long, but a lot of people like 10 to 15 minute interviews. And one of these days I aspire to do a 10 to 15 minute or 10 to 15 minute shows. I aspire to do a 10 to 15 minute show. Okay. All right. So that's it. Use your head in order to discern what's real. Your heart to say what's possible. I'm Robert